My name is Ovia Corbin. I'm 28 years old, and 3 weeks ago my brother called me at 2 in the morning from a hospital bed to ask for one of my kidneys. I should tell you, I'm a nurse. I work in the ICU at Riverside Methodist in Columbus, Ohio. I know what kidney failure looks like. I've watched it pull people under. So when Kyle's voice came through my phone that night, shaking and small, I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I listened the way I listen to every patient. But Kyle wasn't my patient. He was the reason I paid for nursing school by carrying plates at a Denny's for 6 years. And what happened in that hospital room 3 weeks later changed every relationship in my family. Permanently. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This channel tells stories about families, choices, and the moments that reshape everything. If this one resonates with you, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I grew up in Kenton, Ohio, Hardin County, population just under 10,000. The kind of town where everybody knows which church you go to and which parking lot your truck sits in on Saturday night. Main Street had a hardware store, a Denny's, 3 churches, and a gas station that still let you pump before you paid. My dad, Gary, ran a small auto repair shop off Route 31, just him and one part-time guy. He was good with engines, quiet most of the time, made decisions fast and expected nobody to question them. My mom, Jolene, worked part-time at the county library shelving books and running the copy machine. She had a soft voice and a habit of agreeing with my dad before he finished his sentence. Then there was Kyle, 2 years older. The plan. That's what my parents called it, even if they didn't say it out loud. Kyle was the plan. Trade school first, then maybe a business degree, then come back and help Dad expand the shop. Every conversation at dinner circled back to Kyle's future, his grades, his applications, his potential. About me, my dad would say, "You'll be fine, you're smart, you'll figure it out." That was the whole forecast. I was an A student. I loved biology. My teacher, Mrs. Redmond, pulled me aside junior year and told me I should apply for scholarships. Pre-nursing, pre-med, anything science. I went home that night, buzzing. I told my mom at the kitchen table, our old oak table with the long scratch down the middle from when Dad slipped with a socket wrench. She smiled and said, "That's nice, honey." Then she called Kyle downstairs to talk about his enrollment deposit. There was a college fund, though. My grandmother, my mom's mother, a retired school teacher from Marion, had set up a UTMA custodial account when I was born. $32,000. Kyle had one too, but his was only $18,000. Grandma Ellen believed in education, especially for her granddaughter. October of my junior year. I was 17. Kyle was 19, 2 months into his first semester at the University of Findlay. I came downstairs after homework and my parents were sitting at the oak table. Papers spread out, a pen, no dinner on the stove. Dad looked at me and said, "Sit down. We need to talk about the college fund." My stomach dropped before he even explained. Kyle's tuition was more than they'd planned. His fund, $18,000, covered freshman year and part of sophomore. After that, nothing. Dad's shop had a slow quarter. They needed the rest. My fund. "We're going to move yours over to Kyle's account," he said. Like he was telling me he'd moved a toolbox to the other side of the garage. I said, "That's my money. Grandma left it for me." Dad leaned back. "Your name's on it, but I put it in there. I managed it. This is for the family." And then he said it. The sentence that would follow me for 11 years, through every double shift, every tuition payment, every ramen dinner in a studio apartment. "Girls don't need degrees, Ovia. You'll get married. You'll be fine." I looked at my mom. She was looking at her hands. I waited for her to say something. She didn't. I called Aunt Linda the next morning. Dad's older sister lived 2 towns over. I told her what happened. She said, "Your daddy knows best, honey. He did the same for us growing up. No lawyer, no advocate, no adult in my corner." I was 17. I didn't know what a UTMA account was. I didn't know I had legal rights to that money. All I knew was that every person who was supposed to protect me had just told me I wasn't worth protecting. I signed the papers on the oak table. The pen was blue. The next morning, I came downstairs early, eyes swollen. Mom was pouring coffee, back to me, radio on low. I sat at the counter and asked the only question I had left. "Mom, did you agree with this?" She set the mug down. Didn't turn around. "We can only afford one future, Ovia. Kyle needs this more. More than me." She didn't finish the sentence because she didn't need to. I understood perfectly. I'd been ranked, measured against my brother on some invisible scale and found lighter. And my own mother had stepped on his side to tip it. I didn't cry after that morning. I want to be clear about that. I stopped, not because the hurt faded, but because I realized tears weren't currency in this house. Nobody was trading in what I felt. So I traded in something else. Movement. I started applying for jobs that week. Denny's was hiring for morning shift. A bar outside town needed a weekend waitress. I mapped it out on a notebook page. Hours, wages, what I could save by graduation. I looked up CNA certification programs at the library. I printed out scholarship applications on the copier my mom ran every Tuesday. She saw the papers in my backpack once. She didn't ask about them. I'd like to tell you I had some righteous moment, some speech where I told my parents exactly what they'd done. I didn't. I was 17. I was outnumbered. And the people who were supposed to fight for me had already decided I wasn't worth the cost. So I made my own cost sheet. I finished my junior year, then my senior year. And the week after graduation, I packed 2 suitcases, moved into a studio apartment above a laundromat on Main Street, and started carrying plates for tips. My mother chose silence. I chose movement. That studio cost $425 a month. 1 room, a hot plate, a bathroom with a shower stall so narrow I had to turn sideways. The laundromat underneath shook the floor every spin cycle. I worked mornings at Denny's and Friday and Saturday nights at a roadhouse bar called The Rail off Route 68. I learned 2 things waiting tables: how to carry 4 plates at once and how to smile at people who thought I was beneath them. The second skill turned out to be more useful than the first. I got my CNA certification at 19 through a 12-week program at the community college in Findlay, the same town where Kyle was spending my money on textbooks he barely opened. I started picking up shifts at Sycamore Glen, a nursing home on the east side of Kenton. Elderly patients, 12-hour shifts, bed baths, vitals, feeding, repositioning every 2 hours. It was exhausting and thankless, and I was good at it. I opened a savings account at Huntington Bank. The irony of that name wouldn't hit me until years later. I put away everything I could. $40 one week, $60 the next, sometimes $12. I applied for the Ohio Nurses Association scholarship and wrote my essay about my grandmother, a school teacher who believed her granddaughter deserved a classroom of her own. I got $4,000 a year. Not enough for tuition, but enough for textbooks and scrubs. The rest would come from loans and more plates. I didn't call home for 14 months after I moved out. Mom texted twice. Once on my birthday, once on Christmas. I replied with a smiley face both times. Dad didn't text at all. Kyle sent me a meme about waitresses in November. I didn't reply. I started the BSN program at Ohio State when I was 22. Drove to Columbus with everything I owned in the back of a Civic I'd bought for $2,000 cash from a guy on Craigslist. The passenger window didn't roll down. The check engine light was always on. I didn't care. Anatomy, pharmacology, microbiology, clinical rotations, 4 years of learning to think fast and stay calm when everything around you is falling apart. Which, if you think about it, was just a professionalized version of my childhood. I worked nights as a hospital aide at Riverside Methodist while I studied during the day. 3 hours of sleep was a good night. 4 was a luxury. The first time I started an IV on a real patient, my hands shook. The second time, they didn't. By the 50th, it was automatic. That's when I met Marcy Gill. Charge nurse, 6 years in, sharp tongue, big laugh. She saw me fumble a blood draw during clinical rotation, and instead of writing me up, she stood behind me and said, "Slower. Breathe. The vein isn't going anywhere." We started eating lunch together, then covering each other's shifts. Marcy was the closest thing I had to a friend, and even she only got the outline. My parents and I don't talk much. Family stuff. She nodded, didn't push. That's why I trusted her. Graduation was May of 2024. I was 26. I walked across the stage at the Schottenstein Center in a cap and gown I'd paid for myself. No one in the audience was mine. No dad clapping too loud. No mom dabbing her eyes. No brother whistling from the back row. I owned every step on that stage. And when they handed me my diploma, I thought of Grandma Ellen and the $32,000 she'd wanted me to have. 2 years later, I was working an ICU night shift when my phone rang. While I was hauling plates and pulling all-nighters in the anatomy lab, Kyle was at the University of Findlay on $50,000 that wasn't entirely his. He changed his major 3 times: business administration, communications, back to business. He joined a fraternity. He drank most weekends, then most weeknights. He graduated in 5 years with a 2.3 GPA and a degree he'd never use. He moved back to Kenton, tossed his things in the basement bedroom at Mom and Dad's, and started working the counter at O'Reilly Auto Parts. 23 years old, living downstairs from the same kitchen table where I'd signed away my future. Dad said, "He just needs time." Same family, same pattern. Cover for the son, forget the daughter. I heard updates through Aunt Linda when she called. She meant well, I think. "Kyle's doing fine," she'd say. Just finding his way. Finding his way through a case of beer every weekend. But sure, he quit O'Reilly after a year, worked at a tire shop for 6 months, then a body shop, then back to auto parts. Different store. Never lasted anywhere long enough to get benefits. Somewhere in those years, something else was happening that nobody noticed. Kyle was tired all the time. He went to the bathroom constantly. His ankles swelled. He blamed it on long shifts and cheap shoes. He didn't go to a doctor because men in Hardin County didn't go to doctors unless something was broken or bleeding. Dad had set that example too. Walk it off. Years later, a nephrologist would explain it to me in clinical terms I understood perfectly. IgA nephropathy, Berger's disease, autoimmune, chronic, made worse by alcohol and years of zero medical oversight. By the time Kyle collapsed at work, his kidneys were already gone. By 28, I had built something. Not loud, not flashy, solid. I was a registered nurse in the ICU at Riverside Methodist, the same hospital where I'd mopped floors as a night aide 4 years earlier. I had a 1-bedroom apartment in Clintonville, a quiet neighborhood north of campus. Hardwood floors, a bookshelf I'd built from a kit, a cast-iron skillet I used every Sunday morning. Marcy told me once, "You're the best nurse on this floor and you know it." I didn't argue, but if you looked closer, the picture had gaps. I lived alone. No serious relationship in 3 years. I hadn't been back to Kenton in 2. My contact with my family was thin enough to see through. Mom sent a text every Christmas and birthday, and I sent back a heart emoji. Dad didn't text. Kyle sent memes every few months, the kind you forward without thinking. I never replied with more than a thumbs up. Nobody at the hospital knew about my family. Not really. Marcy knew I had a brother. She knew I didn't go home for holidays. She didn't know why. I kept work Ovia and personal Ovia in separate drawers, and I kept the personal drawer locked. I was excellent at caring for strangers. I could hold a dying man's hand at 3 in the morning and talk him through his fear with steady hands and a steady voice. But let someone try to care for me and I'd find a reason to back away. That was the scar tissue. 11 years of self-reliance had made me capable and closed. I told myself the quiet was peace. Most nights I believed it. And then, on a Tuesday in February, my phone buzzed at 2:14 in the morning. The screen said Kyle. I was charting in the nursing station when the buzz hit. Kyle hadn't called me in 3 years. The last time was to ask if I still had his old PlayStation controller, which I didn't, and which tells you everything about the depth of our communication. I stepped into the hallway, pressed the green button. His voice came through thin and shaking. Ovia. I'm at Riverside. They said my kidneys are shutting down. Nurse brain activated before sister brain could catch up. Which floor? Who's your attending? What's your creatinine? He paused. I don't know what that means. I'm scared. I leaned against the wall. The fluorescent hallway buzzed above me. My brother was somewhere in this building, in a bed, connected to machines I maintained for other people's family members every shift. I'll come up after my shift, I said. Flat. Professional. The same voice I used when I told a patient's wife that the next 24 hours were critical. Kyle said okay. Then, Ovia? I'm sorry to call so late. He'd taken $32,000 from my future and never once apologized for that. But he apologized for calling at 2 in the morning. I finished my shift, charted every patient, checked every drip line. At 6:15, I clocked out, took the elevator to the 4th floor and walked down a hallway I'd walked 1,000 times. But this time I wasn't carrying a stethoscope. I was carrying 11 years of silence. Room 412. The door was open. Kyle was propped up in the bed, thinner than I remembered, skin with a gray-yellow tint I recognized instantly. The look of kidneys that had stopped filtering weeks ago. Beside his bed, a dialysis machine hummed. I'd stood next to hundreds of those machines. This one sounded different. He tried to smile when I walked in. Nice scrubs, he said. I didn't laugh. I stood at the foot of his bed and looked at him the way I looked at charts, reading the data, not the person. IV in the left hand. Central line in his chest for dialysis access. Fluid restriction sign on the whiteboard. He'd lost at least 30 pounds since the last time I'd seen him, which was a Thanksgiving 4 years ago, where I stayed for 2 hours and drove back to Columbus in the dark. Tell me what happened, I said. He explained, or tried to. Months of fatigue, swollen ankles, blood in his urine he thought was a UTI. He didn't go to a doctor because he didn't have insurance. The auto parts store didn't offer it, and he'd never signed up for Marketplace. Then 3 days ago he fainted behind the register at work. Coworker called 911. Ambulance brought him to the closest trauma center, which happened to be Riverside. The nephrologist, Dr. Brennan, told him his kidneys were functioning at 12%. End-stage renal disease. He needed dialysis 3 times a week, 4 hours each session, and he needed a transplant. She said a family member is the best match, Kyle said. A sibling. He looked at me. I looked at the dialysis machine. The hum was steady, mechanical, indifferent. I heard that sound every day in the ICU. It was background noise, like the ventilation fans or the hallway announcements. But standing next to my brother's machine, it sounded like a clock winding down. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I said, I need to think. Then I walked out, took the stairs because the elevator felt too small, got in my car, and sat in the parking garage for 11 minutes before I turned the key. 2 days later, my parents were in Columbus. They hadn't told me they were coming. They'd called Kyle, got the room number, and drove 3 hours north on I-75 without checking whether I wanted to see them. I got a text from Mom at noon. We're here. Kyle's room 412. Come when you can. Come when you can. It sounded like a request. It felt like a summons. I finished my shift, changed out of scrubs in the locker room, and walked to the 4th floor in jeans and a fleece jacket. Civilian clothes. Dad was standing by the window with his arms crossed, looking out at the parking lot like he was sizing up a job. Mom sat in the vinyl chair next to Kyle's bed, holding his hand. She looked older than 55, thinner, grayer, smaller. When I walked in, she stood and hugged me. It lasted longer than I expected. She smelled like the dryer sheets she'd always used. Dad came over and put one arm around me. A side hug. Quick. The kind you give a coworker at a retirement party. Then he got to it. The doctor said a sibling is the best match. You need to get tested. Not would you consider it. Not how do you feel about this. You need to. As if it were another line on a to-do list, right between checking the oil and rotating the tires. I looked at him. Same Gary Corbin. Same jaw. Same expectation that the world would arrange itself the way he decided. I'll think about it, I said. His eyebrows went up. What's there to think about? He's your brother. I didn't answer. I kissed Mom on the cheek, nodded at Kyle, and walked out. In the elevator, my hands were shaking. I squeezed them into fists until they stopped. That night, I sat on my couch with every light off and my phone face down on the coffee table. Nurse Brain ran the numbers without asking. Living kidney donation, laparoscopic nephrectomy, 2 to 4 hours in the OR, 4 to 6 weeks recovery, lifetime with 1 kidney. The remaining kidney compensates. Most donors live normal lives. Risks: infection, blood clots, chronic pain, the small but real possibility of needing a kidney yourself someday. I knew all of this the way I knew drug dosages, automatically, without emotion. The emotion was somewhere else, trapped behind a wall I'd spent 11 years building. The next day on shift, Marcy caught me staring at a monitor without reading it. She pulled me into the break room. You look like you haven't slept. Talk to me. So I told her. More than I'd ever told anyone. My brother's upstairs, 4th floor, kidney failure. I might be a match. She set her coffee down. Upstairs? Here? She stared at me. You never told me you had a brother. There are things I don't talk about, Marcy. She didn't push on that. Instead, she asked the question nobody else had bothered to ask. Do you want to get tested? I looked at the ceiling tiles, counted the dots in one square. I don't know what I want, I said. That's the problem. Marcy leaned against the counter. She had that look she got when she was about to say something you didn't want to hear. The testing is the easy part, Ovia. It's the conversation you're avoiding. She was right. The blood draw, the cross-match, the psych eval, those were medical procedures with clear protocols. But what I owed my brother, and what my brother owed me, and whether those two debts could exist in the same room. No protocol for that. I registered for the HLA compatibility panel on a Wednesday. Dr. Adele Brennan handled my intake personally. She'd seen my hospital badge and made the connection. 45 years old, calm eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of doctor who talked to nurses like colleagues rather than assistants. "I want to be clear," she said, closing the exam room door. "This evaluation is entirely voluntary. No one, no family member, no physician, no one at all, can pressure you into donating. That's federal law and hospital policy." I said, "I know. I work here." She almost smiled. The panel took a week. Blood draws, cross-match, antibody screening. I went through it the same way I ran IVs. Efficient, clinical, detached. On Thursday, Dr. Brennan called me into her office. 5 out of 6 HLA antigen match. Cross-match negative. Near-perfect compatibility. "Medically," she said, "you're an excellent candidate." She paused, folded her hands. "But medical suitability doesn't equal obligation." I nodded. She gave me a card for the hospital's independent donor advocate, someone I could talk to who had no connection to Kyle's care team. I put the card in my pocket and drove home. From the parking lot, I called my father. "I got tested. I'm a match." 3 seconds of silence. Then, "Thank God. When can they schedule it?" Not "thank you." Not "are you okay with this?" Not "how are you feeling about giving up an organ for the brother whose education was purchased with your stolen future?" When can they schedule it? I sat in the driver's seat after we hung up and pressed my forehead to the steering wheel. The engine was off. The parking garage was empty. And I realized that this phone call was the most my father had said to me in 2 years, and every word was about Kyle. The campaign started the next morning. Mom called at 8. "Honey, the doctor says Kyle's getting worse. His numbers dropped again overnight. They might have to increase dialysis to 4 times a week." She let that sit. Then, "Blood is blood, Ovia. He's your brother. You can't let him die over old grudges." Old grudges. 11 years of stolen money, abandoned dreams, and family silence, packed into a dismissal that made it sound like I was holding on to a playground argument. Dad showed up at my apartment 2 days later. Didn't call first. Just knocked. I opened the door and he was standing in the hallway in his work jacket, diesel on his boots. He'd driven 3 hours for the second time in a week. And again, not to see me. To pressure me. "The church is praying for Kyle," he said, sitting on my couch without being invited. "Pastor Rick wants to talk to you." "Dad, this is a medical decision, not a prayer request." He ignored that. "Just do it, Ovia. Stop making this about you." About me, my kidney, my body, my recovery time, my risk. And somehow I was making it about me. That same week, Pastor Rick called. Gentle voice, rehearsed concern. "Your mother asked me to pray for your family. She says you're going through a difficult decision." I said, "With all due respect, Pastor, this isn't a decision the church gets to make for me." I hung up and sat on the kitchen floor for 20 minutes. The linoleum was cold. I thought about the oak table in Kenton, the blue pen, the way my mother had looked at her hands instead of looking at me. I decided I'd go back to Kenton that weekend. Not to give in. To look them in the eye. I stood in my apartment that night, phone still warm from my mother's call, and I thought about every meal I served, every late-night study session, every bill I paid alone. I want you to think about that too. If this story is hitting close, leave a comment. Tell me, would you have answered that phone? Saturday morning. I drove 3 hours south to Kenton. The house looked the same: tan siding, chain link fence, Dad's shop out back with the bay door propped open even though he wasn't working. Mom and Dad were at the hospital in Columbus visiting Kyle, so the house was empty. I let myself in with the key under the ceramic frog on the porch, same place it had been since I was 12. The kitchen smelled like coffee and pine sol. The oak table was still there. The scratch was still there. Everything was still there except the girl who'd sat at that table and signed away her future. I wandered into my old bedroom. It was storage now. Boxes of Christmas decorations, a broken treadmill, Kyle's old desk from high school shoved against the wall. Something had been nagging me since the HLA results came back. The fund, the paperwork, the details I'd never questioned at 17. I opened the desk drawer and started going through a stack of old papers. Old report cards, a car insurance renewal, a 8-row brochure, and underneath it all, a cream-colored envelope. Huntington Bank logo in the upper left corner. Addressed to Ovia M. Corbin. Postmarked March 2016, the year I turned 18. Never opened. I stood in that cluttered room with dust floating in the window light and slid my finger under the flap. The letter was one page. It informed me that UTMA custodial account ending in 4471, established for the benefit of Ovia M. Corbin, had reached maturity. As the named beneficiary, I was now the legal owner. I was invited to visit my local branch or call the number below to claim the account and its contents. But the account had been emptied 2 years before I ever turned 18. They'd had me sign at 17. And when the bank sent this letter, the letter that told me the money was legally mine, my parents had taken it from the mailbox and buried it in a desk drawer. They knew. They always knew. I drove back to Columbus with the envelope in my jacket pocket. I didn't tell my parents I'd been to the house. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. I needed to sit with it, the way you sit with a diagnosis before you start talking about treatment. But the campaign didn't stop for my processing. Monday morning, Aunt Linda called. "Honey, your mama is beside herself. She's not sleeping. You know she just wants what's best for both of you." Tuesday, 2 women from the church called. Women I hadn't spoken to since high school. Women who knew my name only because my mother had put it on a prayer chain. "We're lifting your family up, Ovia. God will guide your heart." Wednesday. Kyle's ex-girlfriend Amber texted me. We'd exchanged maybe 50 words in our lives. She wrote, "I know this is weird, but Kyle's really scared. Please think about it." Thursday evening, Mom called again. Her voice was tight, controlled, like she was reading from a script she'd rehearsed in the car. "We have to focus on Kyle right now, Ovia. This isn't the time for your issues. We can only afford one priority. Same logic, same hierarchy. The son comes first. Always." Dad called Friday morning, short and hard. "Your mother is making herself sick over this. Just say yes." He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask about my evaluation, my surgical risks, my recovery time. He asked me to stop upsetting his wife. After that call, I sat on the bathroom floor again, tiles cold against my legs. Marcy texted, "You okay? You were quiet on shift." I typed back fine and deleted it. Typed back, "I'm figuring something out," and hit send. She replied, "Have you actually told them why this is hard for you?" I stared at the screen. She added, "Or do they think this is about stubbornness?" Dad came to Columbus a third time the following Saturday, sat in my apartment with his knees apart and his hands on his thighs like he was waiting in a mechanic's lobby. I poured 2 coffees. Neither of us touched them. "Look," he said. He was using his problem-solving voice, the one he used when a customer's transmission was shot, and they didn't want to hear the price. "Maybe I was wrong about the degree thing. You did good for yourself." He waved his hand around my apartment like it was evidence. Happy? I set my mug down. Is that what you think I need, Dad? You to say happy like it's a transaction? His jaw tightened. Then what do you want? I'm here. I drove 3 hours. What more do you want from me? I want you to understand why you're sitting in my apartment right now, I said. Because I paid for this apartment. With the career I built. After you took my money and told me I didn't need it. His face went red. I'd seen that color before. It was the color right before the silent treatment kicked in. The shutdown. The 3-day freeze. That was 11 years ago, Ovia. And Kyle's been living in your basement for 5 of them. He stood up, walked to the door, turned back with his hand on the knob. If your brother dies because you're holding a grudge, that's on you. The door closed. I sat in the chair and listened to his boots on the stairs, then the front door, then his truck starting in the lot. He said it was on me. But I'd spent 11 years carrying things that were never mine to carry. His words didn't land the way he wanted them to. They landed like confirmation. Sunday night, I was checking on a patient, a 70-year-old woman named Dorothy, post-op hip replacement, no family listed as emergency contact. She was awake at 2 in the morning, which happens more than people think. I adjusted her blanket and she looked at me with watery eyes and said, "Are you all right, sweetheart? You look like you're carrying the whole floor on your shoulders." A stranger in a hospital gown noticed. My own parents hadn't. I checked her vitals, made sure her PCA pump was functioning, dimmed the light, and told her to sleep. Then I drove home and sat at my kitchen table, my table, not the oak one in Kenton, and pulled out a notepad. I didn't write demands. I didn't write a contract. I wrote 3 truths that needed to be spoken out loud before I could give a piece of my body to the family that had taken a piece of my future. 1. Acknowledge what was done, the fund, the lie, the hidden letter. Say it out loud in the same room with everyone present. 2. Dad says it to my face, not, "I was wrong about the degree thing." He'd already tried that and it bounced like a bad check. He needed to say, "I was wrong about you." 3. Kyle commits to taking care of himself. Follow-up appointments, sobriety support, real accountability to his own body. Because if I gave him a kidney and he drank himself back into failure, I couldn't survive that. These weren't conditions for a kidney. They were conditions for being a family. I picked up my phone and called Mom. "I'll meet you all at the hospital Saturday," I said. "Kyle's room. And I have things I need to say." She was quiet. Then, "Okay, honey. Saturday." Thursday night, 8 o'clock. Not 2 in the morning this time. Kyle's name on the screen. I picked up. His voice was clearer than the last call. Still tired, but not panicking. Dialysis had stabilized him enough to think straight. "Mom says you have things to say at the meeting. She's nervous." "Are you?" I asked. "I'm on a machine 3 times a week for 4 hours," he said. "I'm past nervous." A pause stretched over the line. Then he said something I'd waited 11 years to hear and never expected from him. "Ovia, I know I never said this. The money. I knew it was yours. I knew what Dad said was wrong. I took it because it was easier. Easier." That word sat between us like a stone. For him, it had been easy. An envelope appeared. A bank account grew. Tuition got paid. For me, it was 6 years of plates and double shifts, and sleeping 3 hours between an anatomy textbook and an alarm clock. "It was easy for you, Kyle," I said. "Not for me." "I know," he said. "I know that now." Through the phone, I could hear the hum of the dialysis machine, that same steady mechanical sound I knew from every shift. But it was different coming through Kyle's phone. It was the sound of borrowed time. Dad said I should tell you that you owe this family, Kyle added. I told him I wouldn't say that. I closed my eyes. Kyle refusing to carry Dad's water. That was new. Maybe it was the machine. Maybe it was the 4-hour session staring at a ceiling and thinking about what kind of man he'd become. Or maybe it was the first time in his life that something had been taken from him, and he finally understood what that felt like. Friday passed in 12-hour increments. I worked my shift, focused on patients, ran IVs, charted, conferred with Dr. Patel on a post-surgical complication in bed 7. Efficient, steady, the same as always. After my shift, I drove home, showered, and stood in front of my closet. I didn't want to wear scrubs to the meeting. I picked jeans and a gray sweater. Simple. I didn't want to walk in as my family's nurse. I wanted to walk in as their daughter. I took the cream envelope out of my jacket pocket and read the bank letter one more time. The paper was soft from being handled, the fold lines going white. UTMA custodial account. Matured. Named beneficiary. Ovia M. Corban. I put it in my shoulder bag. I called Marcy. I'm meeting my family tomorrow. She was quiet for a second. Do you want me to come? I almost said yes. Marcy was the kind of person who could sit in a room full of tension and not flinch. She'd seen codes, cardiac arrests, families falling apart in waiting rooms. But this wasn't her fight. No, I said. This one's mine. All right, she said. But text me when it's done. I mean it. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table with the notepad in front of me. 3 items. I didn't need to read them. They'd been forming for 11 years. In Denny's kitchens, in nursing home corridors, in anatomy labs, in ICU bays at 3 in the morning. They were in my bones now. I set my alarm for 7, brushed my teeth, lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. Saturday came the way verdicts come. Slowly at first, then all at once. Saturday, 10 o'clock. I walked into Riverside through the main entrance instead of the staff door. Different angle. The lobby looked bigger from this side. The information desk, the gift shop with its teddy bears and Mylar balloons, the family members checking in with that particular expression, half lost, half trying to hold it together. I'd seen that expression 1,000 times. Today, I was wearing it. Elevator to the 4th floor. Left turn past the nursing station where I'd charted 100 shifts. A colleague waved. Hey, Ovia, you're off today, right? I nodded and kept walking. Room 412. The door was open. Kyle was sitting up. He looked better than the first night. Still thin, still jaundiced, but alert. The dialysis machine hummed beside him. Mom sat in the vinyl chair, a rosary threaded through her fingers. Dad stood at the window, arms crossed, same posture as the last 3 visits. Shoulders forward, jaw set, a man bracing for an argument he'd already decided he would win. A 5th person was in the room. Janet, the hospital social worker assigned to living donor evaluations. Mid-50s, calm presence, lanyard with an ID badge. She was there to ensure the process was voluntary, standard protocol. Her presence changed the air. Dad couldn't bully the room with a witness he couldn't dismiss as family. Good, Dad said when he saw me. You're here. Let's get this moving. I sat down in the remaining chair, didn't take off my jacket. The shoulder bag with the envelope sat on my lap. The dialysis machine marked time behind Kyle's bed. The fluorescents buzzed. Everything in this room, the machines, the monitors, the social worker with her clipboard, said medical. But what was about to happen was personal. I need to talk first, I said. Before I could start, Mom spoke. Her voice was different, thinner, stripped of the polished church lady tone she'd been using all week. Before you say anything, I need to tell you something. She looked at her hands. The rosary beads clicked softly. When I was 20, I was pregnant with Kyle, and your dad said we didn't need 2 degrees in the family. He said he'd handle the income. I wanted to be a teacher, Ovia. She looked up at me. Her eyes were wet. Nobody ever asked me what I wanted. The room went still. Dad stared at the floor. Kyle watched Mom like he was seeing her for the first time. Even Janet looked up from her clipboard. I told myself what we did with your fund was practical. Mom continued. Family comes first. That's what I said. But the truth is, I was angry. Angry that you had a chance I never got. A scholarship. A plan. A grandmother who believed in you enough to put $32,000 aside. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. So I let your father take it. Because if I couldn't have that chance, I didn't want to watch you have it either. The admission hung in the room like smoke. It was the most honest thing my mother had ever said to me, and it was devastating, not because it was cruel, but because I understood it. I understood how a woman who gave up her own dream could become the kind of woman who let someone steal her daughters. Understanding didn't make it okay, but it made it human. Thank you for saying that, Mom, I said. My voice was steady. I meant it. Then, but I'm not done. I reached into my bag and took out the cream envelope. Held it up where everyone could see the Huntington Bank logo, the postmark, my name in the address window. This is a letter from Huntington Bank, I said, dated March 2016, addressed to me. I turned it so the front faced my father. It says my UTMA custodial account was ready for me to claim when I turned 18. The money Grandma Ellen set aside, it was legally mine at 18. Not the family's, not Kyle's, mine. I set it on the bed tray between me and Kyle. It was in my old desk, in the room you turned into storage, unopened. Dad's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, then something harder. A wall going up. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. Yes, you do. I kept my voice clinical, the same register I used when explaining a medication change to a patient's family. Calm, clear, no room for misinterpretation. You knew that fund was legally mine at 18. You had me sign it over at 17, when I didn't understand what I was giving away, and no one told me I had the right to say no. And when the bank sent me this notification, you took it from the mailbox and hid it. Mom's hand went to her mouth. Kyle stared at the envelope on the tray like it was a lab result he didn't want to read. Dad's jaw worked. We did what we thought was best for this family. You did what was best for Kyle, I said, and you lied about it. For 11 years. Janet wrote something on her clipboard. The scratch of her pen was the only sound in the room besides the dialysis machine, still humming, still counting down. I'm not asking for money, I said. The statute of limitations is long past. The account is closed. The money's gone. I know that. I watched Dad's shoulders drop half an inch. Relief, probably, that this wasn't going to become a lawsuit. But before I schedule a surgery to give one of my kidneys to this family, I need 2 things. The room tightened. Janet leaned forward slightly. Kyle's hand gripped the bed rail. 1. I need you, Dad, to look at me and say you were wrong. Not about the degree. You already tried that, and it didn't mean anything. About me. About deciding I was worth less than Kyle. About telling a 17-year-old girl that her future didn't matter because she was a girl. Gary's face went from red to white. I turned to the bed. 2. Kyle, I need you to commit to taking care of yourself. Follow-up appointments, a sobriety plan, real accountability. Because if I give you a kidney and you drink yourself back into failure, I can't carry that. Kyle nodded before I finished. I've already started talking to a counselor. Dr. Brennan set it up. And I went to my first AA meeting last Tuesday. I hadn't known that. It landed gently, like a bandage on something raw. I looked back at Dad. His turn. And he chose exactly the way I expected him to. He stood up so fast the chair scraped the linoleum. This is blackmail. You're blackmailing your own brother's life for a goddamn apology. His voice bounced off the walls. Janet sat up straighter. Mom flinched. Kyle closed his eyes. I stayed seated. I'm not blackmailing anyone, Dad. I'm asking you to see me. Dad paced the narrow strip between the window and the bed. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. His hands opened and closed at his sides. He pointed at me. You've always been like this. Always making everything about you. I didn't move. Everything was always about Kyle, Dad. That's literally why we're in this room. Mom said, Gary, sit down. He ignored her. She's holding our son's life. And then Kyle spoke. Dad, stop. His voice was tired, raw, but clear enough to cut through the noise like a scalpel. The room froze. Kyle had never interrupted Gary, not once in 30 years, not at the dinner table, not in the shop, not anywhere. Kyle pulled himself up straighter against the pillows. The IV line swayed. The dialysis machine kept its rhythm. She's not holding anything, Kyle said. She's asking you to do the one thing you've never done, admit you were wrong about her. Dad stared at his son, his investment, his plan. The one who got the degree and the money and the basement bedroom and every second chance this family had to offer. And that son, from a hospital bed, hooked to a machine that was doing the job his own kidneys couldn't, was telling him he was wrong. I watched Dad's face change. The anger didn't leave. It rearranged. Layers peeled back. Under the fury was something I'd never seen on Gary Corbin's face before. Fear. Not of losing Kyle. He'd been afraid of that for weeks. This was different. This was the fear of a man who'd spent his whole life being certain and who'd just been told by every person in the room that his certainty had been cruelty. Janet spoke quietly. Mr. Corbin, perhaps we should take a breath. Dad sat down. The chair creaked. Nobody said a word. The silence lasted long enough for the dialysis machine to cycle twice. Dad sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it, like the sound had been wrung out. When I was 12, he said, your Aunt Ruth quit school so I could stay. He rubbed his face with both hands. She was a sophomore. Smart, smarter than me. But my dad said somebody had to work, and it wasn't going to be the boys. So Ruth took a job at the poultry plant and I stayed in school. He looked at the wall. Not at me. Not yet. Nobody thanked her. Nobody said it was wrong. That's just what families did. That doesn't make it right, I said. No. His hands dropped to his knees. No, it doesn't. He looked up at me. His eyes were red. Not crying, but the pre-cry of a man who hadn't let himself do it in decades. You were smarter than Kyle. You were smarter than me. You were smarter than anyone in that house, and I thought that meant you'd be fine no matter what. That you didn't need the help. He swallowed. That you were tough enough to make it on your own. I was tough enough, I said. But I shouldn't have had to be. He nodded, slowly, like something heavy was settling into place. But he still hadn't said the words. The actual words I'd written on a notepad at 2 a.m, the words that had been forming since I was 17 and sitting at an oak table with a blue pen. I waited. I'd been waiting 11 years. I could wait a little longer. Mom spoke first. Gary, just say it. She deserves to hear it. I turned to her. And then I said the thing I'd been carrying since she'd called me and told me blood was blood, since she'd reduced 11 years of stolen future to old grudges. You're right, Mom. Blood is blood. You put mine in a savings account and gave it away. She flinched. The rosary beads clicked against each other. The double meaning settled over the room. Blood is family. Blood is the organ I was being asked to surrender. Both taken. Both mine. Dad stood up. Slowly this time. Not